Look, you were in the last parliament. There were on multiple occasions, legislation that was introduced or was separated from other things that was designed to be able to say, hey, this party doesn't want you to have a tax cut. The message that Canadians sent during this campaign was like, not now.
Well, I'm reluctant to go into any kind of specifics.
The Liberals have released their obnoxiously touted tax bill. You know the one. The one that Champagne and Carney keep saying they expect the Conservatives to support. Well, there's just one small problem, or more like 10 if you count. The bill is deliberately poisoned to force the Conservatives to vote against it, which confirms what we've all suspected. The Liberals have zero interest in prioritizing affordability for Canadians. They just want to play political games instead.
Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, we present Bill C-4, an explosive bill, if you will, for those that understand the reference.
Nice.
So, notice that it says, an act respecting certain affordability measures for Canadians and another measure. I wonder what that other measure is. We will take a look shortly. Here's the summary of the bill. So Part 1 amends the Income Tax Act to reduce the marginal personal income tax rate on the lowest tax bracket to 14.5% for the 2025 taxation year and 14% for the 2026 and subsequent taxation years. So the Liberals are making good on that promise.
Right, but if you look, we're not even getting the full tax break right up front.
Right. So...
I mean, I don't recall them campaigning on that.
No. Part 2 amends the Excise Tax Act and other related regulations to implement a temporary, note the word temporary, GST new housing rebate for first-time home buyers.
I don't recall them campaigning on the temporary part either.
Neither do I. Part 3 is essentially repealing the consumer carbon tax legislation now that the rate is down to 0. And Part 4, you may wonder, what the heck does this have to do with a tax bill? It amends the Elections Canada Act to make changes to the requirements relating to political parties' policies for the protection of personal information. Now, we want to talk about this temporary tax break on new homes. So this is essentially part of this section. It's laying out the criteria, but I want to draw your attention to Part B here. The agreement of purchase and sale referred to in paragraph 2B is entered into after May 26, 2025 and before 2031. So what does that mean? Well, this $50,000 or up to $50,000 tax break, you only get it if you buy your home within the next 5 years, basically, or 6 years. That's what it means. And you have to take possession of your house by 2036. Shouldn't be a problem in most cases, but this means that this is very politically motivated. So what they're trying to do, ironically, is they're going to be driving up housing costs because this is intended to facilitate a buying frenzy for people in order to save the GST tax. So it's going to cause people that are looking to buy houses under $1 million to purchase these houses within the next 5 or 6 years, so the Liberals can say, look, we achieved our goal of all of these new houses being built, because builders will not build new houses unless they've actually sold the land. So this is a very sketchy way of actually implementing this tax break. It's not about affordability, it's about getting their numbers up so they can say, look, we're building all of these new houses. Yeah, by creating another artificial
housing bubble.
Like housing bubble.
Yeah, and I think it's also designed to sell homes and hopefully avoid the housing crash, because if that bubble bursts while your party's in government, you're in big trouble.
Right. Now, this is just it's not even a broken promise, it's a sleaze promise from the campaign, because they didn't talk about this at all in the campaign. All they said was, you will save the GST on new homes up to $1 million. That's all they said.
They never said anything about it being temporary.
No.
They never said anything about regulations that you had to take possession within a certain period of time. And they've extended that window 5 years beyond the date of purchase, which was 2031 to 2036. And the reason for that is because when you purchase a new home, sometimes it's years before they even break ground. So I suppose that in a way it's trying to prevent people from expecting not to pay GST and then getting stuck paying GST because maybe the home is delayed. I don't know.
Because remember that GST is only collected after you essentially take possession of the house. So you don't pay that up front even right now. Now, before we get into this next part of the bill, which is very bizarre, shouldn't be in this type of bill, we want to go back to 3 weeks ago to a conversation that Vashi Kapelos was having with Steve McKinnon. And it was about this potential tax bill that was coming down the pipe. Listen to her question and listen to what he says.
Let me drill down into one specific thing we know is coming when the House resumes, and that's what the Prime Minister spoke about yesterday, this Ways and Means motion to introduce a tax cut. The Conservatives I've interviewed, whom I put the question to, is that something that you're going to support, given you also proposed a tax cut during the campaign, mentioned if it is what your government says it is, like if it is the tax cut and not a whole bunch of other stuff designed to wedge them, then yes, in principle they would, but they're waiting to see if that's the case. Will that be the case? Is this going to be a straight up and down tax cut, or are you going to include other stuff in there?
Well, I'm reluctant to go into any kind of specifics, but suffice to say we've agreed to a date to talk to the other House leaders. We will obviously keep dialoguing with other parties with respect to our plans and what we hope to accomplish. And this will be very transparent about what we hope to accomplish in this spring sitting. The tax cut is certainly prominent among them.
In principle, can I ask you though, like, look, you were in the last Parliament. There were on multiple occasions, legislation that was introduced that or was separated from other things that was designed to be able to say, hey, this party doesn't want you to have a tax cut. And the Conservatives played their own games too. I'm not trying to take away from that. I think the message that Canadians sent during this campaign was like, not now. Let's actually do the things that both parties are saying that they want to do to help Canadians' lives and improve their lives. Is that a message your party has taken to heart? And in principle, will that be reflected in what comes through the House?
I think that's a very valid insight, Vashi, with respect to what Canadians are telling us. They're telling us they want results out of this Parliament. They don't want games. In principle, your question was in principle. In principle, we absolutely want to move forward on initiatives that are what they say are what we say they are very focused and targeted at getting the results that we committed to Canadians.
That should have been a simple yes or no answer.
Should have.
It really should have. But again, the Liberals are setting up a poison bill so that the Conservatives will vote against it so that they can then turn to Canadians and say, look, the Conservatives don't want you to have a tax cut. And these are the kinds of games that we've heard the Liberals love to play. We've heard this from multiple people who support the Conservatives, people in the know, and they are just tired of these Liberal games. Canadians need affordability. We need it yesterday. We needed it 10 years ago, and you guys are still trying to play games with your legislation. This piece about the Elections Canada Act that we're going to get into shortly has absolutely nothing to do with taxes, should not be in this bill. And it seems like they put it in there just to poison it.
And given how the NDP voted on the throne speech, I'm wondering if the NDP will vote against this as well, based on what is in here. All of the parties should be voting against this, what is in here, in terms of what's in the Elections Canada Act, if you really, want to be real here. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it and let you know why we're concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, Part 4 of the Elections Canada Act, in the tax bill, because changes to Elections Canada Act should be in the tax bill when they have nothing to do with taxes, right? Now, there are some parts in the Elections Canada Act that do have to do with taxes, but none of what we're going to be talking about. So, what are they doing? Well, we're going to direct your attention to Part 44. Section 385.1 of the Act is repealed. What are they repealing? Because they don't say. Well, you'll be interested in what they're repealing. This is the current Elections Canada Act, and you'll see that 385.1 is policy for the protection of personal information, parties already registered, etc. Within 3 months after the day on which this section comes into force, the leader of a political party shall provide the chief electoral officer with the party's policy for the protection of personal information referred to in paragraph 385.2, which you don't need to see at this point, and the internet address in paragraph 385 if, before the day on which this section comes into force, the leader of the party has applied under section 385 for the party to become a registered party, but as of the day the chief electoral officer has not yet informed the leader under subsection 389 whether or not the party is eligible for registration under section 387 or on the day, etc., etc. And failure to comply, if the leader of the political party doesn't comply with subsection 1, then, there's some consequences. So this whole section is being repealed. So what does this mean? This means that they don't actually have to show the chief electoral officer the privacy policy. And it also means if they don't show the chief electoral officer the privacy policy, then there is no consequences because there is no failure to comply.
So real quick, for those of us who aren't, chief information officers or former chief information officers, what is a privacy policy? What's it for? What's it do?
So a privacy policy is something that all organizations need to have. And what it is it defines what personal data that organization is collecting and who your privacy officer is, basically who is responsible for answering any questions related to any personal data, and what you do with that data, how you collect it, and other mechanisms like that. If you share it, how do you share it? Do you have consent? Who are you sharing it with? How are you collecting it? Are you doing it digitally? Are you doing it by paper? And what information specifically are you collecting? Are you collecting first name, last name, email address, political affiliation, etc.? So a privacy policy sets out how you manage that data, but also how you protect that data and how you're going to use it. So if this is essentially removing the requirement for the party to actually show the chief electoral officer their privacy policy prior to actually registering a party, well, that's a little concerning, isn't it?
Well, what I'm concerned about is the government, which is the Liberal Party, has so far tabled 5 bills this session, C1 through 5. Number 1 doesn't really count because C1 is an act to administer the oaths of office or something like that. So it's standard. They have the exact same one in the Senate too. So out of the 4 remaining, 2 of them now have concerns regarding privacy.
Right, and loosening the controls and regulation on privacy. But we're not done yet. So that's the first part that they want to repeal. This is the second one that they want to repeal. Despite the definition personal information in subsection 2.1, for the purposes of the section, personal information means information about unidentifiable individuals. So, to summarize this, they're removing this section and they're actually moving it elsewhere and changing it slightly in the act. So you'll see where it says in subsection part 45, section 385.2 of the act is deemed never to have come into force and is repealed. So 385.1 is out and 385.2 is out. Now this is what they're adding. Purpose of the provisions of this act related to the protection of personal information, including the provisions of this subdivision, is to provide for a national, uniform, exclusive, and complete regime applicable to registered parties and eligible parties respecting their activities in relation to personal information, including the collection, use, disclosure, retention, and disposal of personal information. Note how it says respecting their activities related to that information. Next section they're adding, in order to participate in public affairs by endorsing one or more of its members as candidates and supporting their election, any registered party or eligible party, as well as any person or entity acting on the party's behalf, etc., 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 subject to this act and any other applicable federal act, carry out any activities in relation to personal information, including the collection, use, disclosure, retention, and disposal of personal information in accordance with the party's policy for the protection of personal information.
So what does that all mean?
So this basically means that this is necessary in order for the party to do whatever it wants with your data according to their own privacy policy. Not anything else, but with their own privacy policy.
But according to repealing, like according to this new bill they want to put in, they'll repeal the part where they even need a privacy policy.
So they need a privacy policy that is identified in a previous section. They just don't need to show it to the chief electoral officer to see if it's compliant, because that's no longer a requirement. So they just have to have a policy. The policy can be terrible, and there's no guidelines for what has to be in that policy, and they don't even have to show it initially to the chief electoral officer when they're registering the party.
So what is this party's obsession with
Non-privacy?
Yeah, non-privacy.
It's a great question. You'd have to ask Mark Carney. But let's just keep going, and more questions will come. This is where it gets very interesting, folks. When participating in public affairs by endorsing one or more of its members as candidates and supporting their election, a registered party or eligible party, as well as any person or entity acting on the party's behalf, including the party's candidates, electoral district associations, officers, agents, employees, volunteers, and representatives, this is the key part, cannot be required to comply with an act of a province or territory that regulates activities in relation to personal information, including the collection, use, disclosure, retention, and disposal of personal information, unless the party's policy for the protection of personal information provides otherwise.
So if the province has requirements for a privacy policy, this kind of overrides it.
Well, no. Yes and no. If the province comes to the party and says, we demand that you actually share what you've done and share some of this data with us to ensure that you're complying, the party can say no. They actually don't have to abide by provincial law. That's what this section means.
Why? Why is this specific to political parties? This is so bizarre.
It centralizes control of who gets to enforce privacy law when it comes to the political parties to the federal level. Because notice this says province, but the nation is made up of provinces. So no matter what province the party is operating in, they cannot compel the party to actually disclose any of this. It can only be done at the federal level, which that's not designed to do so right now. So this is another very interesting change that they're trying to put in here. Let's continue. For greater certainty, the registered party, eligible party, or person or entity acting on the party's behalf cannot be required to provide access to personal information or provide information relating to personal information under its control, or to correct or receive, adjudicate, or annotate requests to correct personal information or omissions in personal information under its control. So, if you as the person say, hey, that data that you have is incorrect, you need to change it, the party can say no.
That's dumb though, because as a political party, you want to be able to contact your supporters. So if I say, hey, I've changed my email address, political party, can you change that for me? And they can go, no, I don't think so.
But this isn't necessarily just pertaining to your supporters, because as they're out door knocking and they're knocking on doors and they're talking to people and they're gathering other data and having that in their database, they're going to have data from non-supporters in their database as well. So that's something else to consider. It's not just Liberal Party members that they will have in their databases. Same as the Conservatives, same as the NDP. They have lots of Canadians and their addresses in their apps, so they understand who's voting for what and when they did so. So all that personal information is in scope of this. Policy for protection of personal information. A registered party or eligible party, as well as any person or entity acting on the party's behalf, including the party's candidates, electoral district associations, etc., 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 must comply with the party's policy for the protection of personal information.
Well, that doesn't seem so bad.
Well, no, because it's just basically saying, hey, your crappy policy that isn't subject to anything and the province can't actually come after you for it you have to abide by it. That's basically what that says. Great. Now, this goes to one of Tanya's earlier questions. The policy for the protection of personal information of a registered party must be publicly available in both languages, be written in plain language, and designate the privacy officer who is responsible for overseeing the party's compliance with the policy, include the name and contact information of the privacy policy, state the types of personal information in relation to which the party carries out its activities, explain using illustrative examples how the party carries out its activities in relation to personal information, such as by indicating whether it does so online or through the use of cookies, and describe the training related to the protection of personal information that is offered to the party's employees and volunteers who may have access to the personal information that is under its control. That's what it has to have. Not a lot there.
So it doesn't even say that the person whose information that they're collecting has the ability to contact the party and say, get me off of your list.
No. And as previously stated, they don't have to do that.
That's concerning.
It's very concerning. It's 100% concerning.
I mean, we run an online shop, and if somebody was to contact us and say, listen, I purchased from you and I don't want to purchase from you again, can you remove us from your list? We would have to comply.
Well, and this is the question, because again, as we talked about in our Bill C2 video, this again flies in the face of PIPEDA, which is the Personal Information Protection Act governing electronic data. That specifically says if somebody comes to your organization and says, I want my data deleted, you must do that.
Right.
According to this, that is contradicting PIPEDA. So this is the second piece of legislation regarding privacy that the Liberals have put forward, that they're contradicting another Information Management Act that's already in place.
So why are the Liberals contradicting PIPEDA, and why are they trying to tack this onto an income tax bill?
This is the big question. They either don't understand or haven't read PIPEDA. Now which I can't imagine that they would do, or they would just argue in court, well, you know, this legislation takes precedence over PIPEDA. I would not bet money that the court would side with the Liberals on that. So it's very bizarre why they would do it this way, that one act completely contradicts another.
I think the reason they're tacking it onto the income tax bill is, again, so that they can point at the Conservatives and go, look, Canadians, look at these guys. They're not willing to give you a tax break. They don't want to take the GST off homes, etc., etc. Mark my words, if the Conservatives vote against this, that's exactly what's going to happen. So for those people in your life that maybe they're still supporting Liberal, warn them now. Warn them now that this bill is poisoned, and that you will hear the Liberals come out and say that if the Conservatives vote this down, that the Conservatives are against an income tax reduction for Canadians.
Well, and ask them, you were just in an election. Why are the Liberals wanting to remove your rights to your own personal data and remove the government's of the provincial government's ability to actually call them to account on it? Why would the Liberals want to do that? Meetings relating to protecting personal information. So this is the biggest joke of the entire bill, folks. The Chief Electoral Officer shall hold at least one meeting each calendar year relating to the protection of personal information by registered parties and eligible parties.
Well, and the reason that's a joke is because they don't have to show anything to the Chief Electoral Officer if these new changes go through. So why would they need to meet with him about personal privacy protection when they don't have to talk to him about personal privacy protection?
Right. And the only time that they actually have to touch their privacy policy is when they register the party. That's it. So they have to have a policy, but they don't have to show it to the Chief Electoral Officer, and they never have to update it afterwards, according to this new legislation.
Do they have to make the public aware of their privacy policy?
Yeah, it has to be publicly posted, but that's about it. That's about it. So this tax bill, this affordability bill, that the Liberals kept saying, this is our priority. And they didn't talk about these changes to the Elections Canada Act in the first couple of weeks of Parliament. Remember, they were saying, we're going to be putting a tax bill shortly. We're going to be reducing the GST shortly. We're going to be removing the carbon tax shortly. You didn't talk about removing privacy controls shortly when it comes to the Elections Canada Act and how political parties govern themselves.
You know, a thought occurs, and I just had this come into my head right now, is that we've got, maybe 2 weeks left of Parliament and then it's summer break. And I would anticipate that they want to try to ram this bill through as fast as possible. And if the Conservatives get in the way and want to run it through committee or want to stop it or slow it down or edit it in any way, that the Liberals are then going to blame the Conservatives. Look, they're holding up this tax bill. We wanted to have this bill done for Canadians as fast as possible. And look at them. They're voting against it. They're trying to either get rid of it completely or slow it down.
That's most likely the play here. So hopefully the NDP and the Bloc all call them to account, because regardless of whether this was poisoned or not, it's obviously poisoned, but let's just say it's not. That part about Elections Canada, they need to have some people in committee come and talk about that and talk about the implications of removing these regulatory privacy controls on political parties as they manage the data.
Yeah, I would certainly hope that the Chief Electoral Officer of Elections Canada would testify at committee as to why it's important for him to know what the privacy policy of the parties is.
So Canadians, do not let this bill fly under the radar. Please share it out there. Let your Liberal voting friends know that this is not in line with what they were elected for. This is them trying to smash through this tax bill in the name of affordability and pulling on everybody's heartstrings, while at the same time allowing themselves to run free and manage Canadians' data within the political party however they wish, with absolutely no accountability whatsoever.